mentioned this morning that I was excited about the series for next week, and I'm also excited about what we're talking about today. It's a thing that makes me motivated to get up and come out here on a Sunday morning. It's a thing that makes me motivated to be right here. It's a thing that I think through and makes me motivated throughout the week as I think through to Sunday. And that is you. That is you, and that's us, and this ministry that we call Pioneer Community Church. It motivates me because I think about the possibilities of what can be accomplished together. I think about what we have accomplished together, and I'm going to touch on a few of those things today. But I think through all that stuff, and I think about the impact that we have had on our family, on our friends, and our community, and to our missions organization really out throughout the world. This is the church here, and we're going to touch on that in a second. But some of you may not know, you guys see me standing here, and you may not know how I got here. You know my story of before when I got saved, but I'll just tell you a little bit about how I got here to where it's to be standing in front of you today. Started out in 1984. It's a long time ago. That's before millennials were born. They were born in 1985. And actually, I'll say 1994. I'm sorry, 1994. In 84, I'd come off of a journey. Where I was questioning my faith, whether this faith was my faith or whether it was my parents' faith. See, I didn't just want to follow. I wanted to know the reason why I was following. And so I stopped going to church, and my parents were really thrilled about that. And I kind of studied world religions, and I came back to, this is really what it's supposed to be. But the thing that got me throughout that studies, as I was thinking about these things, I kept thinking about, if our lives as Christians are supposed to be like Jesus, why am I not experiencing that in the power, that excitement in my life? And in many people around me, their life didn't look too exciting to me. And so I started questioning everything. I drove everybody crazy. And for those of you who know me, like Pastor Donat and stuff, know me from way back when, I drove our church leaders insane. I questioned everything. And I didn't question it in the right way sometimes. Well, most of the times I questioned in a way to kind of put them on the spot, which is really bad. But I really thank those leaders, because despite me and my youthful arrogance and my youthful whatever, they still saw it fit to give me some leadership roles. So I ended up leading youth ministries. I ended up, after a while, leading the choir. We had a choir there. And I ended up becoming a deacon, which is pretty amazing in and of itself. But throughout that time, I still kept driving them crazy with my questions about why. Every tradition that we had, I questioned, like, well, why do we do this? Why are the ladies wearing that little thing on top of their head? Why do we always sing, just the same songs over and over? Why? And why do we do communion every Sunday? And the answers that I got, in many cases, were an answer that my parents got and their parents got, but was not an answer that really struck and resonated with me. And so, I was like, what am I missing here? And so, something happened in 1998. There were two things that happened that really started a change in my mind. Number one, I knew this girl at work, this lady at work, and she was one of, well, I won't say in case she's listening, but in case other people listening know who this is. But there's this lady at work, and she was going through some marital issues at the time. She was a devout Catholic, and she went to church every Sunday, and she faithfully carried, and she says she has to carry her envelope so that they know that she was there, her envelope with her money. And she followed all the rules of Catholicism, and I'm like, she goes, I have to go. I'm like, why do you have to go? She goes, because I have to go. That's what good Catholics do. And then she and her husband got separated, and she was down in the dumps, and a friend of hers invited her to a church. And she went there, and she came back, and she was like, Gary, I went to a church. And it was unlike any other church that I've ever been to. And she started telling me about the church. And she started telling me about the music. And she started telling me about the people. And she started telling me about the excitement that people had. And that people were greeting her in the parking lot. And people were just bubbling over with joy. And so she started going to 2 churches. Her family, she'd go with her family to one. And then she'd go to this other church with her friend. Till eventually her husband, who they were separated, started to see something different in her. And she invited him to come, and one Sunday he came and he got saved. And then they brought the kids over after the kids got their first baptism, I guess, whatever, first communion. And so they're over there. But during that time, about 4 or 5 months after that, there was a lady at work who I'd say she's pretty far away from God. She would probably admit that too. At that moment in time, she was contemplating cheating on her husband. And she wasn't bashful about it. She actually told me that she was going to cheat on her husband, and she had planned it out and everything. But somebody invited her to a church. And she went to a church. And by the way, she grew up in church, but she had long stopped going. And she went to this church, and she came back, and she was saying the same thing. It was a different church. But the same thing that my friend was saying. Like, oh man, I just went to this church. It just blew my mind. It's, the people, the music, the sermon. The sermon was like so relevant. The pastor was teaching from the Bible, but he was applying it to something that I could use tomorrow. And I'm like, this sounds intriguing. And so she invited me. I'm like, where do you guys meet? This was 1998. And she said, well, the address is 12600 Taft Street. We meet in a school. By the way, this address is 12600 Taft Street. And I came here, Donna and I came, and I think Jonathan was a baby, and we sat right over in that back corner, over in the back of the church. And what I saw blew my mind, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And I saw where people who before were not interested in church, were disillusioned with church, was now very much interested in coming to church. And interested in telling their friends and telling everybody in the highways and the byways. And so, in this time also, I went and I interviewed people. And I asked my friends at work, I'm like, hey, why don't you go to church? Do you go to church? Why don't you go to church? What do you think about God? What do you think about Jesus? What do you think about Christians? And you got all kind of information about, what people thought about Christians. And one of the things that they said was that church people like to think that they're all that, and they have it in here, and we're out there, and we're far away from them, and they're in here, and they'll be over here inside church, and they'll be like, come and join us in here. And they'll be outside looking, and they'll turn around and look. I'm like, why? Y'all don't look like you're having any fun. Y'all don't look like you're doing anything interesting. And so there was no desire on the many, many, many people that I spoke to just go to church. And like, why not? This is what I used to go to church, but it just didn't do anything for me. It didn't mean anything to me. There was no life. They talked about, people always talk about the hypocrites in church, right? And by the way, every human being in some way or shape or form is a hypocrite. It's just in case, if you guys think you're not, well, you just heard it from me. Me too, in some ways. But throughout this time, I visited this church. The church is called, they have their own building now, Christ the Rock Community Church. The thing that I discovered as I was going through my interviews and my prayers and reading, I started studying churches and churches that were growing, that were fundamental, is a couple truths came out, and I want to share those truths with you this morning. The first one was God is fanatical about reaching out to people who are far away from him. God is just like, yeah. Sitting inside up in heaven, I'm like, hey, you guys, come. God actually came down, and he went down to ordinary sinners, and he's like, come with me, come follow me. and he headed towards a path. And God was always fanatical about reaching out to people that were far away from him. And God would do anything. We saw it in Jesus. He would do anything. He would do anything to get people to come and follow him, to come people to experience him. In Luke 14, Jesus, I just love, you'll hear me say this over and over again, I just love Jesus. Because when I was growing up, people used to say, gentle Jesus, meek and mild. There was no meek and mild about Jesus. Jesus was one powerful, one strong man who was fearless, who would say anything to anybody that needed to be said. But he was also extremely compassionate. Jesus was sitting around and the Sabbath, and it's Luke 14, and there were some religious leaders around, and there was a person who was sick. They had a growth in their stomach like a tumor. And Jesus asked, well, is it okay if I heal somebody on the Sabbath? See, the Sabbath was their heritage, was their culture, was everything to them, that there was, what God had established for man to make sure he had a chance to rest. Man had turned it around and made it into something more than what God had created it to be. And so this time, but that was the accepted rule. And Jesus says, it's okay. And everybody was silent. And Jesus healed the man. He broke religious traditions. He broke down laws. He broke down anything that was any barrier to anybody who was far away from him. And oftentimes, that made the religious leaders, the religious people, uncomfortable. And Jesus was like, is it lawful? In other words, he was like, tell me, show it to me where I'm not supposed to do X, Y, Z. Anything to help somebody who was far away from him. And in Luke 15:1, we see this illustrated in a story. I like this story. It's actually 3 stories, but here's a story. It says, now the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathered around. We're all gathered around to hear Jesus. I'm going to pause there because when we read this, we can miss a whole lot of things in here. He mentioned Luke, who documented it. He was a physician, he was a historian. He like the tax collectors and the sinners. He didn't just say the sinners, he said the tax collectors and sinners. It would be like if I were telling you a story and I said, now the serial murderers, the gang rapists, the gang members, and the regular sinners were gathered around to meet Jesus, to hear Jesus. These guys were so bad that they had their own category of badness, the tax collectors. And the thing that I love about this is this statement, is that people who were most unlike Jesus, like Jesus, and he liked them back. I heard this statement about 10 years ago, and it's been resonating in my mind for 10 years. People who were most unlike Jesus actually liked Jesus. And he liked them back. So when Jesus was gathered around to talk, the people who were most unlike him, the biggest sinners and just the regular sinners, as well as the religious leaders, they gathered around to hear Jesus. And the thing is, if being a Christian is to be like Jesus and to be striving like Jesus, what is true of Jesus should be true about me. And what is true about Jesus should be true about you, and you, and you, and you. It should be true about all of us, that people who are most unlike Jesus should like us, and we should like them back. They should like Pioneer Community Church. It's like, I like going to that church. I don't necessarily believe what they have to say, but I like them. And we will like them back. You see, that brings me to principle number 1. We should be a church where unchurched people want to attend. We should be a church where unchurched people want to attend. People who are far away from God, people who are on their faith journey, people who are closer to God, and people who are really striving after God. All of us should want to attend. If this church only serves one segment, that only the people who are really in should want to come, then we would have missed the mark. If we only serve the people who are looking to Jesus, we've missed the mark. We need to be a church that unchurched people want to attend, in addition to being all the other pieces. And that's in line with Jesus. You see, when people came to a Jesus crusade, when people came to a Jesus event, when people came to a Jesus church service, they didn't come for the right reasons. The unchurched people, they didn't come for the right reasons. You would think that people would come to hear the spiritual insight and the teaching and the rightly dividing the word. But these guys over here, some came for the food. They're like, hey, I heard that, man, Jesus, you don't have to show up. The last time we had fish and festival, and he broke it up, and we had fish to take home and bread to take home. He's like, man, you got to see this man, Jesus. You got to show up. You got to show up for the food. Nothing about the spirituality. There was another group that showed up for the show. They're like, man, you got to come check this man Jesus out because look, he said to this man who was lame, he's like, hey man, get up and get up and walk. And the man got up and walked, and the other man's like, stretch out your arms. And he was like, man, I even heard he turned water into wine. At a wedding party, after people were drunk. Y'all missed that. They didn't teach you that in Sunday school, did they? And so people would come for the food. And some people would come for the show. And other people would come for whatever reason they came for. But when they would show up with what they came for, Jesus often left them with something to think about. He left them with something else. They came for one thing, and Jesus was like, well, you get that too, but here's what you're going to leave with. And oftentimes, he left them with something to think about that began with a simple little story. And we're going to tell a story today. And the story is this. He tells it in Luke 15, where he starts out with the tax collectors and sinners. All those people are gathered around, or all those unchurched people wanted to gather around. And he told the story. He said, he just asked a question. It's like me standing up here and I said, hey guys, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Well, immediately, or probably 3/4 of the audience would have identified, because farming society, they were like, yeah, I know what I would do. Because if I'm a shepherd, the owner is dependent on me to keep 100 sheep. If I'm the owner, I want 100 sheep. And so when he said, doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? But like, yeah, that makes sense. That's what you do. Everybody would agree with that. That's what you do. And then he says this. And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. He doesn't even lead the sheep home. He's so happy. He puts the sheep on his shoulders. It looks pretty ridiculous, right? But Jesus illustrates in a point that you're so happy when you find something that's lost that you cherish it. And you'll do anything. He left the other 99 sheep. He put them in a pen in the open country, and he left them to go after the one. People would be like all aligned with that, and then he busted out with this. He said, he calls his friends and says, rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep. And everybody's like, yeah, I agree. That was what we would do. It was like, hey man, I found a sheep that was lost. Call the other shepherds. Call them, like, I found the sheep. And then he says something that would cause people, the religious people, to cringe. He said this, I tell you, in the same way, there'll be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. See, all those 99 people already had their party, right? They're rejoicing when they came on. And so the 99 people would say, hey, there are 99 of us. The 99 of us. Why aren't you all rejoicing over me? Angels, Gabriel, Michael. I was like, because what was lost, it was found. And people like, and then he tells another story. Right after that, he says, Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Well, that would get the rich people in, church, in his gathering. They're like, yeah, I know if I have an investment and one's going bad, if I have something that's valuable, if I have 10 rings and I lose one, and I'm like, all right, I'm in tune, and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp and sweep the house and searches carefully until she finds it? Everybody's like, yeah, I can identify with that. And then it says here, I tell you, there's rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. And he's hammering that message home. That says, like, look, I really care about lost people. I am passionate. I am fanatical. I am intentional about people who are far away from me. And so he did the 2 lost things, and then he goes on a little bit further down. And he tells the story of the lost son. We know it as a prodigal son. So you talk about the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. And the story goes, you know the story, but the story goes, a son says, hey, Dad, I can't wait for you to die. And I need for you to give me my inheritance, or I'm going to go all Menendez brothers in you. He didn't say that. I just made that up. He said, Dad, I need my inheritance now. And the dad gave the money to the son, and he's like, he went off and he squandered it. And after the money was done, he's like, man, I got to go home and be a servant to my father. But the father, he was looking out every single day. Every single day he would stand up and look out on the road to see if his lost son was coming home. Every day. And the moment he sees his son afar off, he doesn't stay in the house and say, come son, run for it. He doesn't say that. He goes out, leaves everybody in the house, goes out. And he meets his sons and hugs him and puts jewelry on him. And he's like, come, we're going to throw him a party. We're going to celebrate. And his other brother's like, what about me? What about me? I've been the good son. I've done everything. I've taken care of. I've even done his chores while he was out partying. And the father says this. He says this. My son, you are always with me. Everything I have is yours. For those of us who are in the kingdom, everything that the Father has is ours. We have heaven. We have each other. We have everything. We got everything, but that one over there has nothing. He's like, everything I have is yours, is ours, is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He's lost and he's now found. It's not that Jesus wasn't saying that the people who were in the fold weren't important. They had the full inheritance. They have everything. But the one outside has nothing. And it's about going out and getting the one outside and bringing him and giving him the same inheritance that the others have. My son is lost and is now found. And over and over again, Jesus in his stories and in his illustrations demonstrated that he was willing to do the things that was necessary to bring people closer to him. He was willing to do what it was. And that brings us to our next principle, which is we must be a church that is intentional about reaching people who are not yet in. We have to be intentional. Every making moment of every day, we have to be looking down the street for anybody or boyfriend, or girlfriend, or husband, or wife, or whatever, or friends, or family members, or co-workers, saying, I have a full inheritance. They got nothing. Let me go and get them. And too many times we stay here and we like, come on in. The weather is nice over here. Come on in. And people like, we got to walk over to them and reach them where they are and grab them by the arm and says, come walk with me. Let me show you a man who has shown me all things. That's the second principle. We have to be intentional about reaching people. And I'm not talking about Pioneer Community Church as a building right here. I'm talking about we are the church. Each and every one of us, but collectively we form Pioneer Community Church. Which brings us to principle number 3, which is we must remove any non-fundamental barriers to people coming to follow Jesus. See, we have a statement of faith here. The statement, if I was going to scroll up on the screen, but it's on our website. You can read it. It talks about that we believe in Jesus being the only way to heaven. We believe that by grace you're saved through faith, is not of works. We believe in that God is existent in 3 persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We believe all that, and we will not ever compromise on any of those fundamental beliefs. But if any one of our other things that we hold dear or any other practices that we hold stands in a way and becomes a barrier in any way, shape, or form to somebody who's not yet coming in, we got to remove those barriers. And there's a gravitational pull. There's a gravitational pull for the people who are in the majority to control what happens to the people who are not in the majority. So we are the majority of people inside the church, and we're trying to reach one. And we're like, come be exactly like us. We're like, I don't know how to be like you. And there's a gravitational pull, and they're like, I can't measure up to those standards. I can't measure up to that. I don't know the songs. I don't know how to dress right. I don't know how to, whatever it is that people have in their head that's a barrier, that's not even really a barrier, but they have it as a barrier. Like, is that what your problem is? Is that why you don't come? All right, we won't do that. As long as it's not a fundamental. And by the way, this gravitational pull and this struggle that every church have, not only our church, every single church have it. It's a pull to look inward and to make ourselves much happier. And in doing so, we inadvertently, without trying, make it a little difficult at times for somebody on the outside to come in. Back in Acts chapter 15, the church is about 20 years old. And the church started out in Jerusalem, and then people got persecuted and they spread out. And the message went out to the non-Jewish world. But every tradition in the Jewish church, in the early church, came from Judaism. They still observe all their Jewish laws. They still observe many, many things. And so they were teaching that, hey, really, you come to faith in Jesus Christ. You come to faith in Jesus Christ just by faith alone. However, in order for you to be like a good Christian and to be a good church person, you got to convert to Judaism also. And people are like, well, what does that mean? What do I got to sign up for? And it says, well, man, it's real simple. You go to this priest, right, and he's going to do a little snip on you. Like, whoa. Circumcision? At 40 years old? I don't think so. And so they were to have these rules and so it became a big problem. People were not coming, and the Jewish people are like, what's the big deal? Jesus sacrificed all for you, so why don't you just come? And became a barrier. The rules, there are 622 rules and laws that overwhelming majority of them, they still wanted the people who were converting to Jesus, to following Jesus, to follow. And so, so Paul and Barnabas decide to go and address it. And so they go there and they come back and they're telling stories to the Jerusalem church leaders about, man, people are getting saved. They're speaking in tongues and they receive the Holy Spirit and all this other stuff. And then, here's what the question that the church leaders ask or said. The Gentiles must be circumcised and required to keep the law of Moses.